Hey, welcome to another edition of Deebo and the Donks. If you're looking for places you can find this podcast, Facebook, I have a webpage there, Deebo and the Donks. Just go ahead and type that in. You can find it on Twitter. You can find it on Spotify. You can find it on YouTube. You can find it on iTunes, just about anywhere. And, of course, iHeartRadio, which surprisingly has become the number one place for podcasts in the world, which still, I thought it'd be Spotify, I thought it'd be YouTube, but it's currently iHeartRadio. So good for them and good for anyone who can get on there. So if you're looking otherwise, you can just go ahead and subscribe on whichever platform you're listening to, but I am on all of the platforms. I do have some guests planned here over the next month, which is pretty exciting. I'm kind of hoping to go a different way with the podcast as far as whatnot. Right now, I'm kind of all over the place. I've done episodes on COVID, Trump, sports, local Vikings, Steelers stuff that I'm into. I've done some poker things, and I have some poker things coming up here where we're going to talk about what's going on in the state of that, casinos and things like that. I've been in that lifestyle. I've worked in the industry for many years. And then, of course, the one we're going to do today, which is going to be, it's kind of a fun one. This is going to be about rock and roll. This is going to be about one of my passions. I do love music to the core since I was a kid, and I'm sure many of you also do. Who doesn't, right? Come on. Heck, I even like Christmas music. I like just about any kind of music there is. I'm drawn to rock and roll. I'm drawn to it. I like the blues too. Lately, as I've gotten older, I really like the blues. I really like listening to a good, solid, slow rhythm, with breakdowns, and I love breakdowns and bridges and just having a good feel. Never been a huge fan of a guitar solo, and there's a lot of guitar solos in the blues. That's kind of where rock and roll, I believe, got it, is from the blues. Let's be honest, a lot of, Black Sabbath, a lot of really heavy, dark, tony bands have been right from that cut. Right, that's the cut where they're from, is the blues. Because if you listen to a blues song, that's kind of how they go. They kind of go just like a rock song, or just like a metal song, if you will. So we're going to talk about the state of rock and roll, and let's be flat out honest. You'll see it in the headline and all my search things, rock and roll. It is dead. It's hard for me to even say that. I talk with friends about it, and I don't even know where it's going. Where the hell is rock and roll going? It's been dying for years, and it does this. It's cyclic. I get that. But in the 1950s, we had doo-wop, which was a good rock and roll. In the 60s, we had the Stones, and that was the beginning of Queen and Black Sabbath and all kinds of Deep Purple and all kinds of great bands. And the Beatles were as big as ever. And rock and roll was thriving in the 50s, 60s, 70s. 70s had so much great rock and roll. Now it's nostalgic. It was kind of, nobody knew what to make of it. And we look back at it, and I love listening. Who doesn't love listening to 70s rock if you like rock? And then we had the 80s, which of course evolved into the, the hair bands and a lot of crazy stuff in the 80s. The 80s was just nuts, music-wise. The 90s, then we had a transition. We transited into, grunge, if you will. The Seattle scene, we went down that road, and it continued throughout the entire 90s. And then we had, towards the late 90s and early 2000s, we had that Limp Bizkit, Rage Against the Machine kind of run. We kind of went into a different type of rock and roll. We went into what they call nu metal, or whatever they call it. Kind of rap metal, if you are, or rap rock. That was a huge thing for a while, and that still is to this day. And since then, I don't know where to go with it. What were the 2010s? I don't know. I don't know what to call them. I mean, I'm sure there's something they're called, but what music came from 2010 to 2020? During that decade, what was the genre in rock and roll that we listened to and it evolved. 70s was punk kind of took over. 80s was hair metal. 90s grunge. 2000s that new metal, new rock stuff. What is the 2010s and what are going to be the 2020s? And the answer is I have no idea. Hell, there aren't a lot of rock and roll bands out there. The one that jumps to my head all the time is the Foo Fighters. Dave Grohl's band from Nirvana. He was the drummer in Nirvana. He created this I think he might have created this before. He may have been working on this before Kurt died, but either way, I could be wrong about that. Anyway, he created Foo Fighters, and the Foo Fighters, to me, they make the most real rock and roll, and they're the biggest band, so they can fly the flag. You know what I mean by that? You need a rock band that can do that right now more than ever, because with all of these places to get free music, with all of these places to listen to music, the music industry has transisted. And let me explain. In the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, and 80s, and 90s, there was one way to make a lot of money. Make rock and roll albums. Okay? If you made an album, you could sell millions and millions of copies. Okay? Even just hundreds of thousands is fine. You're going to make a lot of money at $12 to $14 a pop. Okay? And that's how you made your money. And then you went on tour to promote that record. Okay? You didn't make a lot of money on tour. You made money, but not a lot of money. You just made extra money, okay? You could have lived probably on your record sales for the most part, depending on your levels, okay? Now, if we're talking Motley Crue or, Bon Jovi or things like that, fine. But there were a lot of bands that couldn't survive on just their record sales, so they toured more, or because they wanted to. Now it's evolved. Now we're in a situation now where it's back where it was way back in the early 70s, where you made money off of touring. You would tour and sell you would sell T-shirts, merchandise. So you'd sell your merch, and then you would sell the tickets, and that's how you made your money. The record, you didn't make a ton of money. That started in the late 70s and 80s and 90s. And now we're back to that. Now people can make albums in their garage. They can make albums in a very small studio. You can make albums because these computers that you can buy can help you make those albums. Maybe you just send it out to an editor or producer and they kind of make it look better or sound better, but you can get an EP out there not so hard nowadays. And there aren't a lot of record companies willing to sign you for a lot of money. It's few and far between now. Rap has taken over that genre. Rap is huge now. Or hip hop, whatever you want to call it. That's the genre that the youth are listening to. They're not listening to a lot of rock and roll, in my opinion. And I believe record sales prove that. So what's happened now is you don't make albums as much. Now you just tour. You make all your money touring and selling T-shirts and whatnot. I had went to a concert a few years ago. No, it wasn't a concert. It was just a rock show. Little tiny bar that's no longer open called Pavlitsky's on 65, or Pav's on 65. It was owned by the Pavlitskys for many years. They owned two bars back then. One was a sports bar up in Andover, Minnesota, and that was really just for softball and partying and whatnot. They had music there, just it wasn't a music venue primarily. But their original place, Pav's on 65, in I guess technically that's Spring Lake Park, I believe, right on that range, off of 85th Avenue, and they're in Highway 65. That place was a music genre forever. Kind of they'd put a lot of money in their sound system over the years, and because they would have big bands. Now they only hold a few hundred people in this place, so you're seeing bands up close and personal. And I went and saw a band. They were opening up. I can't remember who I was going to see. I can't remember the headliner, if you will, but I do know that a band called Sons of Texas were opening up. I think they were the second band that was playing. And as soon as they got on stage, you know that feeling. Come on, if you're into rock and roll, you know that feeling. You're like, holy shit, this hits me. This is it. And they were great. And I was hooked to the band, and I liked them right away. And, they played their 9 or 10 songs, and they got done. And, again, it's a very small venue, so you can walk around, go wherever you want. And I went and grabbed a libation or a beverage after the show because, the 20, 30-minute break before the next band comes on. and they have like a merchandise area in the back of the bar. And then towards the back of the bar, they also have one of those tri-wheels. If you're from Minnesota, you know what a tri-wheel is. You spin it, it's kind of like roulette. You bet your dollars or your $5, and you try and get your number 1 through 40 to spin on, and then you win money back. So that's right by it. And I was watching the wheel and whatnot because, I'm bored. And right over at the merchandise desk area, I see the lead singer of Sons of Texas, sitting there selling merchandise. I'm like, whoa, that's not very glamorous. You just played a rock show. You're opening up. I can't remember the band. I wish I could, but you're opening up for a big band that people know, and you think you're traveling the world playing rock shows that are not from us. They're obviously from Texas. They're traveling throughout the country probably in a van or whatnot, or maybe a small tour bus, but depending on what kind of money is being involved in this tour. And I went up to him, and I walked right up to him. I said, "Hey, good show." He goes, "Thank you. I appreciate that, man." I'm like, "Yeah, you kind of remind me a little bit of you guys kind of had a. I'm a huge fan of Pantera. If you don't know who Pantera is, they were a '90s rock band, metal band, if you will. They called them progressive metal. I don't know what that meant, but they were just metal. And they were, the '90s and 2000s. That was kind of their thing. And they released, I think, about 5 or 6 albums. And he kind of reminded me a lot of that. He kind of had that presence of their lead singer of Pantera. And at the same time, the band kind of sounded like Pantera. I said, "You guys fans?" He goes, "We're huge fans. We're from Texas." 2 of the founding members of Pantera are from Texas. And he huge fan. And so we talked about that for a couple of minutes. And I said, "So the merchandise, why are you manning the thing? Do you have somebody calling sick?" He goes, "No, it's a very large part of our our income. We don't make much money on selling albums nowadays." And he said, "We make all of our money touring, but we only get X amount a night of the ticket sales because, the headlining band gets the most of the money, and then it trickles down to the other bands. They got to make their money selling T-shirts and whatnot." So I bought a CD, and he gets a large percentage of that CD that he sells at the show. Similar to what he'd get from a T-shirt and whatnot. And it was an interesting conversation because it kind of woke me up a little bit to, holy mackerel, the lead singer of one of the bands is sitting here selling merchandise after the show so they can pay their bills, so they can keep touring, so they can make another album, and so on. And that's when I kind of started to understand that music had changed, that it was so important now to sell the merchandise and to tour. You need to make all your money that way. So you can't just get your music out there like you used to. Back in the 80s, the way you heard about underground music was you would do this thing where you'd go on the paper. You'd find these magazines, and in the back of the magazines, like Hit Parade or things like that, you would go in the back and you would find people that want to trade music. So they would record on a cassette tape. You know what that is? It's a tape. You could tape on it and listen to music. The cassette tape, you would record, you'd dub, because you had a dubber, and you would record your music onto there. And what I mean by that is you'd have songs and you would sell it, and you would transfer it onto a cassette tape, and then trade that music with somebody else who had other music that you wanted to hear. So, for instance, that's how Metallica, if you've heard of them, get it, became pretty big. In the early 80s, they didn't have any music out yet, but they were making music. And people would, their first EP, people would record that onto a tape. They would dub it. If you know what dubbing is, you take one recording and you put it onto another recording, and it does transfer a little bad, so it starts to get worse and worse and worse as the recording goes. So by the end, if you're like the 50th recording and somebody didn't do it right, you've got a pretty bad copy of it, but you got it. And you would trade this music. And it was, an underground scene. So you would get music you've never heard of because you wouldn't want to pay $12, $14 for, a band you've never heard of. That would be kind of, different. Who has that kind of money at 14, 18, 22? You don't want to blow that kind of money on something like that. So you would trade this music. And this is how the music scene, the metal and rock and roll music scene, had an underground feel. And then those people would, check their local, however you check to see who's coming to town. Maybe you hear it on the radio, maybe you see it in a local newspaper or a local, music magazine or music. We had a thing called the City Pages in Minnesota, where you could check that out, and you got it for free in just about every bar. You can just sneak into a bar at 16. It's in the front entryway, and just grab a city pages, get out of there, and go home and read it. And you could see who was coming to town, which was really cool. There was no online then. We're talking about the 1980s, so you had to really look, and you had to know, you had to have your ways to see who was coming to town, so you could go see their shows, so you could plan for it, and you would get that information. So Metallica would be coming to a place, a real small venue. They'd play it like at First Avenue, places like that, places that, it's a legendary place now, but back then, it's very small venue for somebody like that to be playing. And you would go see that band if you chose to, and you could see these bands in venues, very small venues, and you'd know who they are already before they got here. Then MTV came along. And when MTV came along, that kind of changed things. Now these little bands would get a video out, and if they got a record and then a video out, then they could, boom, they're instant stars just like that. Bands like Rat, Motley Crue, Warrant, bands like that, they just got a video out, and once they got a video out, boom, they're in, as long as it hit, radio play wasn't metal yet. It was still rock and roll throughout the country. There were venues for metal. There was a place called K-Rock, I believe it was called, which was locally here, it was an AM station, and they would play the heaviest rock you could find on the radio. Just heavy stuff. The Metallicas and the Slayers and things like that would be on these, on their regular rotation, but you didn't really have, at least locally here in Minnesota, you didn't have that kind of music scene where, you'd be having metal or rock, and if you were looking for that, that's kind of how you had to find it. So there was an underground scene in the 80s, and I don't see that anymore. You don't really have that because it's not cool anymore, It'd be easy to put it on YouTube. It'd be really easy to start a YouTube site and just have underground music on there all the time, but people just don't seem to have the interest in it, and that's what happens to music. That's how it goes away. That's how it can go away, is if no one's interested in it anymore. It seems everyone's kind of interested in hip-hop and rap, and then people like The Voice, and people like, these Kelly Clarkson created, they're really just created by companies. When people were winning American Idol, come on, man, these weren't just nobodies. They were already signed and ready to go, and they were good to go. There's nothing reality about reality television. Okay, it's all business, every single bit of it. So if you won something like that, you were probably already signed and you were ready to go, and they were just promoting you this way. And they would get you into the studio, and there were many, 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 many people that came that way, and they threw them in our face, and they made us like them, and they made us watch them and buy their stuff. And they're still doing it to this day. They control, the music industry now controls what's being released. They have found a way to control it. Rock and roll isn't their thing. Okay, it costs money. It costs a lot of money. You got 4 or 5 guys, you got to pay 4 or 5 guys, you got to put in hotel rooms. 4 or 5 guys, you got to buy food. You got 1 star, you got a bunch of backup people for them. You don't have to pay them crap. You just got to pay the star and take care of the star, and it's easier to promote a star. It's hard to promote 5 guys. It's easy to promote 5, 1 girl or 1 guy. It's really easy to do that. So if you think about why it's gone this way, it's the music industry. They've decided to do this. They still control it. They always have, and they always will. So the only way a band can make it nowadays is by touring. They just got to tour their friggin' butts off. That's what you had to do in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. You had to tour your butt off. You were on tour 250 to 300 nights a year. You're sleeping in vans, you're sleeping in crappy motels, you're sleeping wherever you can. And that's what you did then. And I know they still do it now. It's just, with COVID, you can't. And this is just another punch in the gut for rock and roll. It's going to be tough at this point to recover. It's going to be tough to get through it. So do us all a favor. Do me a favor. Support rock and roll. Find it. Seek it. Look for it. Find it. Whatever rock and roll you like. It can be, hell, in a way, blues is rock and roll, like I talked about earlier. Whatever flips your boat, whatever makes you happy, listen to it, promote it, seek it, share it, get that information out there. We need to get a revolution of rock and roll. We need rock and roll to continue. It's the difference. It's fantastic. It's for the soul. It's so good. It's so great, and kind of the whole point of this podcast is to try and save rock and roll, to try and help it get back up there. I want to promote bands. I want to promote, music to a certain degree to get it up there, have some top 10 lists, whatever it takes, just to have fun with it, to keep it out there, to start spreading that information on my tiny little venue. And hopefully somebody picks up on it and maybe takes it to the next level. Somebody bigger that's, maybe a Bill Burr, somebody huge could, start promoting rock and roll. That'd be important to me. There's still bands out there, you still have your Foo Fighter types, you still have your Nickelback hanging around, you still got giant rock bands. I mention these bands because they're giant, they sell out and, they can compete. But it'd be nice if Metallica would get their stuff together and release a real album that people want to listen to. I haven't listened to a good Metallica album, and I know this, I'm probably in the minority. I haven't listened to a good Metallica album since maybe Injustice for All, but I might even say Master of Puppets. I mean, I didn't love the Black Album, and I haven't liked a single thing they've done since. A few songs here and there. Don't get me wrong. I'm not a what do my buddy call him, kill 'em all snob. It doesn't have to be fast, aggressive, and crazy. Okay, people evolve. Musicians evolve. They want to play different. They don't want to play Kill 'Em All 17 times. They don't want to play that 17 straight albums. They want to play different music and evolve. That's fine. I completely agree with doing that, but that's kind of why some bands should only last 3-4 albums. That's all they've got. They don't want to do that. Just get into different bands and then go play that. It's kind of a cop-out, in my opinion, to stay in a band like as big as Metallica and make music that, let's be honest, most of us don't want to hear. I don't even reach for Metallica anymore because, to me, it's not Metallica anymore. It's just not there. But when Cliff Burton died, to me, Metallica died, and that was the end of it. I really like Jason Newsted, and I like what he did with the band, but then he left. And that's I like the Robert Trujillo. I loved him in Suicidal Tendencies. He's a great bassist, but there's not the same thing. It's not working. Jason Newsted was very vocal, and Cliff Burton ran Metallica. I mean, he was a leader by silence. He did everything, and he did it, and you're doing it his way, and you're making his music, and that's the way it was. I mean, Cliff Burton was the leader of Metallica. James Hetfield and Kirk Hammett and Lars Ulrich all looked up to Cliff Burton. He was their god, if you will, in the band. They all just admired him. He had an arrogance about him, but it was a confident arrogance, That's the stories I've heard about Cliff Burton. Him and James were super, super close. James Hetfield, they were tight. It still hurts him to this day that he's gone. But he had to move on, and that's how it goes. But my point is, when Cliff died, the band kind of died for me. The music changed. It wasn't the same. It didn't have the same aggression. It didn't have the same beats. It didn't have the same fun and speed. Just wasn't the same. And that's kind of where I am on that. So that's kind of where I think I am on rock and roll. Like, it's just slowly died off. Maybe it's because I'm old. Maybe this happens to every generation. Maybe I'm over-exaggerating and rock and roll isn't dying. But, even before COVID, the shows were I'd go to shows and I'm like, this isn't that good. I'd listen to music and I'm like, this isn't that good, and you just can't find it. But that's happened before. That has happened. I remember an old interview I was reading, and I don't remember where I was reading it, probably on Loudwire, one of the Blabbermouth, where I go to find my musical information about the kind of bands I like. And I was reading an article, and Rob Zombie was talking about, this was way back in like 1999, he was talking about why he started a band. And he's, I've learned since then he may have been just kind of speaking, but it stuck with me. And he said, I don't know, I've been going to shows and listening to music, and the stuff I hear, doesn't do it for me, so I wanted to make some good music. I wanted to make it the kind of way I did. So he created White Zombie and formed them. And White Zombie was Rob Zombie's first band that I'm aware of. I'm pretty sure that was his first band. And they were pretty heavy and funkadelic and fun and kind of did their own thing and toured and did great. And then he broke it up because that's what Rob does. And he started his own thing and has done his own thing ever since. And I don't think he'll ever get back together with him. But what I took from it was him saying, I'm just going to make music the way I want to hear it because I don't hear it out there anyway. That was interesting. And maybe that's still happening, and maybe that's what needs to happen more. Some of these young kids need to pick up guitars and not microphones and make real music in a garage with their buddies, and they need to bring it out and bring it to the masses and tour and do their thing. The problem is we're running out of venues. We're running out of places for these people to play. We're running out of places to go. I mean, music is gigantuan. Metal, rock and roll is gigantuan overseas. It's huge in England and Belgium and places like that. That's where all of the great rock festivals are. We have very few of them in the United States, and the ones we do have are dying. Why? I don't know. I mean, I don't understand why you wouldn't want to spend $100 and go see 72 bands. I mean, you can't even see the Rolling Stones for $100. I mean, that's one of the greatest deals left in America, is going and seeing all of these fun bands. And you may not be into that scene. There's still other smaller festivals with much less bands. You'll be 5-6 bands on the venue, and it's more your style of, if you want to see like if you want to see some of the more known bands, Zach Brown Band, things like that. Of course, the country bands and the blues bands and the rock bands stay together, and they tour in groups and whatnot. Now, it's less just one big band, unless it's like Rolling Stones or somebody as big as that. And then they tour with one person. Now we're seeing 4 or 5 bands get together and tour together, so people can get more bang for their buck. Now, the bands make less money that way, but it is what it is, because you still want people to come to the shows. Rock and roll, let's be honest, I'm just going to stick with my tone here. It's dead right now. And I want to do my best part, and I hope you do too. Try and get it back and up and running. Let's get rock and roll back where it was. Let's get it back. Whatever it's going to be is fine. I wouldn't have probably been too fired up about punk if I was into Foghat, if I was into Deep Purple or Black Sabbath. I'm not sure I'm going to be real fired up about the Sex Pistols and the Dead Boys and bands like that. I don't think I'm going to be pretty fired up about that music genre, but you got to force people into it. You just got to run through the wall, and then they'll appreciate it at one point. I hated punk rock in the 80s. Couldn't stand it because it was against everything I wanted to know. I always thought I was going to be more of a metal guy. I'd have, rock and roll. I love the Rolling Stones, and I love bands like Fleetwood Mac, and I just real rhythmic bands that have great loud guitars and whatnot. I love that kind of music too. And I also love heavy metal, as most of you who know me know. I love the heaviest of heavy, and I like what touches my soul. I like stuff that gets in there, stuff that stays in there, stuff that makes my head spin a little bit, but at the same time I feel it. I don't feel most rock and roll. I don't feel any or much rap. I don't feel much hip hop. I certainly don't feel a whole lot in country. I just don't feel it. I don't have. It's not there for me. And I think that's a lot of people are like that. It's just in different genres. They wouldn't want to listen to something heavy because they're like, all I hear is screaming and yelling. Okay, I get that. I understand. That doesn't reach you. It's not your thing, and that's completely okay. But music is your thing. Music is your passion, and if it's great, it's great. Listen to it. Listen to more. Buy more. Help these people out. Help these people that are starving and not making it in the business because we don't buy the music anymore. We take it for free on YouTube, and that's fine. We take it for free on Pandora, and that's fine. I mean, it is what it is now, but, at one point we got to buy a CD. We got to buy some of the music to keep them fed. Otherwise, they can't be musicians anymore. They'll just go play locally with a guitar and just sit there in front of a couple hundred people and make their money that way. But we won't see it and we won't hear it, so that could be something that's coming. I just hope not. I hope it gets, rock and roll finds a way back and gets back into the mainstream, because right now, there is no MTV music. There is no music out there. You got to search for it again. You got to look for it. People would rather watch people sing karaoke on The Voice or whatever these shows are that I don't watch. I'm aware of them. I try to watch them. I just can't. To me, they're awful. I can't watch, karaoke. It doesn't do it for me, man. I don't really want to watch a whole lot of somebody singing somebody else's song. I guess that's kind of what I'm saying. I want to hear people sing their own song. I want to hear people make their own music. That's what I've always been drawn to. When I play guitar and whatnot, not very well, but I do play guitar, and I struggle with learning other people's music. It doesn't do it for me. Okay, you do it to learn to play. Don't get me wrong. You want to learn how other people learned it, and it teaches you how to make different music. It teaches you chords, it teaches you keys, it teaches you all types of things that, depending on what kind of instrument you're playing, it teaches you, how to play differently. But I have no interest in learning, to mimic their song, to karaoke their song. I'd rather make my own music, and I think there's a lot of people out there like that, and that's great. But there's not as many as there used to be. It's a dying breed, and I hope I'm wrong. But what I'm seeing out there, and I do pay close attention to it, there ain't much out there. There ain't much coming. It's very low. There's very few bands out there touring. Right now, obviously, with COVID-19, there's nobody touring. But there wasn't before that either. They were out there trying to tour, but nobody was going to the shows and spending the money they used to spend. Nobody's buying the albums. And the companies aren't promoting them. They're spending all of their money promoting what they want you to hear and what they want to sell, what they think sells. Don't fall for it. Don't let the record companies decide that. It won't work like that. Okay, that's going to do it for this podcast. Thank you again for listening. I'm going to try and have a few, at least 1 to 2 a week. It's kind of been my goal, but obviously with COVID and all the changes, and I just got done when I coach high school football, that kind of consumes me. So, from June, July-ish, all the way, this year with the double restart because of COVID, up until November, I am just, I'm studying film. I'm constantly doing something with football, which I love. And I wouldn't change that for the world, but it does limit my, to do a podcast, a lot goes into it. I've talked about that in the past, and most of you who do them, and most of you, or even have an idea of how technology works, understand that you have to research your what you're going to talk about. You have to research what you're doing, and at the same time, then you have to go ahead and produce it. And then you got to edit it, and you got to deal with it, and then you got to go ahead and promote it and get it out there. So it's a platform from that on. It's a process, and the reason I bring it up is I'm making excuses for not releasing any podcasts. I will try to do more. Hopefully you guys will listen. Please share them. Please share them on your Facebook or wherever you're listening, wherever you're finding this information. Please share it, like it. I really appreciate that if you do. If you don't, that's fine too. But I'm just asking you if you would. That'd be great. Everybody, again, have yourself a wonderful day.